This is the IBJ podcast for the week of January 30th, 2023, brought to you by Taft. I'm Leslie Weidenbender, editor of IBJ, in this week for Mason King. Celebrated jazz guitarist Wes Montgomery was born 100 years ago in Indianapolis and spent much of his career here, recording and performing on Indiana Avenue, sometimes with his brothers and often with some of the greatest jazz, soul, and even pop musicians of his time. Montgomery died in 1968 at just 45 years old. But during his relatively short career, he won 2 Grammy Awards and was routinely selected as the top guitarist in Downbeat magazine polls, 5 times by critics in the 1960s and 4 times by readers. We're turning today's episode of the podcast over to IBJ arts writer Dave Lindquist for an exploration of the ways that Wes Montgomery was an innovator of jazz guitar, why fellow guitarists continue to find inspiration in his playing 55 years after his death, and how he was one of many world-class musicians to emerge from the Indiana Avenue jazz scene in the 1940s and 50s. Joining Dave for the conversation are Rob Dixon, a saxophone player and artistic director of the Indianapolis Jazz Foundation, and Lasana Kazembe, a poet, teaching artist, and assistant professor of education at IUPUI. Here's the conversation.
I'm Indianapolis Business Journal reporter Dave Lindquist, and I'm happy to welcome to the IBJ podcast 2 guests to talk about the 100th anniversary of the birth of Indianapolis jazz icon Wes Montgomery. We're joined by Rob Dixon, saxophone player and artistic director of the Indianapolis Jazz Foundation, and Lasana Kazembe, poet, teaching artist, and assistant professor of education at IUPUI. Hello, Rob and Lasana.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you for having us.
March 6th will be the 100th anniversary of Wes Montgomery's birth. It's an anniversary that will be commemorated several ways in his hometown, including a May 13th special event at the Cabaret venue, where Rob and Lasana will be part of an evening titled In Our Own Sweet Way, honoring the artistic legacy of Wes Montgomery. Rob, who else is on the bill, and what should attendees expect?
Yes, as far as the band, it is the Indianapolis Jazz Collective, and that is myself with Steve Ali on piano, Kenny Phelps on drums, and Nick Tucker on bass. And we have a featured guitarist, Bobby Broom, who is kind of one of the premier straight-ahead guitarists out of Chicago, but nationally known.
And Manon Voice and Bashiri Assad also.
Well, I was going to let Lasana speak to that, but yes, Lasana has put together a program that incorporates Bashiri Assad and Manon Voice, and I'll let him speak to that, what he has planned as far as the vocal part of the evening.
Well, thanks. It's should be prefaced with giving thanks back to you for conceptualizing the centennial observance of Mr. Montgomery. So what I've done as the inaugural artist in residence at the Cabaret, one of my functions in that 2-year stint is to curate. And so I thought it would be really appropriate to pull together other artists, at least 2 other artists, and Manon Voice quickly came to mind, Bashiri Assad, the vocalist, came to mind, and I thought it would be wonderful for us to collaborate in honor of this occasion. So Manon Voice will be joining the production as a spoken word artist. I'm a spoken word artist, and Bashiri he may do some poetry, but he's largely known as a vocalist, and he'll add that vocalese, that special magic.
The Everyday Soul Singer, I believe, is his...
The Everyday Soul Singer, yeah.
What else can you tell us about the work you've done as artist in residence over there?
Right. Well, as artist in residence, I have been in collaboration with Shannon Forsell, the executive director, CEO of the Cabaret. And one of the first production that actually Rob and I did was a concept called The Voodoo of Hell's Half Acre, the traveling genius of Richard Wright from Natchez to Chicago, a blues poetry opera. And it was a multimedia production that featured music and spoken word poetry and visual artists doing live work, honoring the art, life, and legacy of Richard Wright. After that, I've done, along with Rob again, another production called The Blues in Black America. And that's, we're usually a trio or a quartet, and we do that usually during the Cabaret's Alley series in the summertime. It's outdoors. And then the most recent production and collaboration that we've done is called Fire Dance. Body, word, and sound is Prism. And that one featured Ramon Flores, the dancer and professor of dance and movement at Butler University, and two other dancers. And we had a full panoply of musicians. And it was actually a story that was done in two movements, two pieces to each movement, so it had 4 total sections to it. And that one was an homage to healing and the power of art to heal and transform. And so we thought, post-pandemic, it would be really something special to offer to the community.
Definitely. Now, this Natchez to Chicago project, that was also filmed and picked up by public.
It was. Thanks for, that was actually filmed and produced by WFYI. And it was picked up by, we had a 97% market share. So it was shown, it's still being shown on PBS stations throughout the country.
Nice.
Really great. Grateful for that.
Rob, you mentioned Bobby Broom.
Yes.
A national artist. I'm guessing guitarists don't hesitate when given the chance to pay tribute to Wes.
And that's something that I'm really happy about, because usually if you ask a musician, hey, particularly of national or international stature, to come do a project with you, there's a lot of back and forth. But when you say, hey, do you want to come do this thing and celebrate Wes Montgomery? Every guitarist in the world is like, yes, absolutely. How can I be a part? And that's kind of been the reception that we've had as far as, celebrating Wes Montgomery. I think Wes has been a hero and just a mentor, and just someone that every guitar player has looked up to. Every successful, probably, guitar player is acknowledged as being one of their heroes, if not their main hero. So it's exciting to be, to curate a program that is sanctioned by the Wes Montgomery estate as being the official Wes at 100 program.
Nice. And Rob, you're one of the organizers of the annual Indy Jazz Fest. One of my favorite days of writing about music in Indianapolis since I came here in 1998 was the Indy Jazz Fest day in 2016 that was fully dedicated to Wes at IUPUI's Campus Center. What are your memories of that day?
That day was not only, just a who's who in the guitar world, but jazz guitar world, because we brought so many guitar players that were honored to be a part of it. It was a day of fellowship, with Wes's wife, and then Robert Montgomery, Wes's youngest son, being a huge part of it. Everybody was just, grateful. Musicians were grateful to be a part of it. To see the reverence of and the odes that they dedicated to Wes Montgomery was just it was very heartwarming, as well as profound, and really just demonstrated the breadth of his influence across the world. I did a State Department tour. Well, it wasn't a State Department tour. It was a bilateral presidential cultural exchange tour with Russia back in 2012. Obama, Medvedev, cultural exchange tour with Mike Clark, and we went over to Russia, and one of the places we visited, Krasnodar. The guy that ran, I guess, the city he said, I want you to hear my CD, and he played me a Wes Montgomery CD. And I was thinking, like, what? This is Wes Montgomery. But the guy said, hey, this is my sound. So he identified with Wes Montgomery. I was like, man, Wes Montgomery, in Russia, like, people are just, like, all about him, his influence on the guitar, it knows no boundaries. So that's what I thought to myself at the time.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
Let's turn back the clock. Wes was born in Indianapolis. He spent his adolescence in Ohio and moved back to Indianapolis after high school. He worked as a welder and for a milk company. He was a family man who didn't necessarily have music stardom in his plans. Lasana, what's notable about that career arc?
Well, I think what's notable about it, and you'll find this, is, and this is what I think should induce us to humility, is that Wes Montgomery is a part of a genealogy. So he did not come to us in a vacuum. He came, Charlie Christian, and there's just this genealogy of artists and artistic development that he was birthed through. So there's that on the artistic side. And then on the social side, Mari Evans was born in Toledo, Ohio, a few years before Wes Montgomery. And so that the 1920s was a very turbulent time. She was born in 1919. He's born in 1923. This is the Red Summer. This is the year of intense racial riots going on in dozens of cities across the United States. And so he grew up, developed, was socialized in that context as a young boy and an adolescent, and then coming into his teen and young adult years, of course, the civil rights era. And he passed away, I think, a couple of months, maybe June, I think, of '68, a couple of months after Dr. King was assassinated. So we're as black artists, we're never not a part of the social context in which our art is born. So we sort of co-mingle, we sort of co-develop or co-incubate along with the social context. There comes the artistic expression that sort of flowers out of that. So Wes Montgomery's his genius and his penchant, and not only as a contributor to the art form, but an innovator, a technical innovator to the art form. So he just stands he's a mountain, and he stands astride so many, and he will just never be forgotten in this music.
Rob, let me ask you about some of those technical aspects of his playing. What did he do that kind of set him apart?
Well, a couple of things. Technically, he was known for playing with his thumb instead of a pick, and so that kind of the style of playing with a thumb was from Robert Montgomery tells me that he had to play quiet and practicing, so his practice was just using his thumb, and then he got used to that, so that was the style that became very popular, and he was probably the only one to do it on the national scene or international scene, to play with his thumb. And the other was the development of the octaves and the chordal solos that he would play. Playing with those octaves in solos is kind of something that was kind of like definitely branded as a Wes Montgomery trait. And, a lot of guitarists learn how to play, and then they listen to Wes Montgomery records. Beyond his technical contributions to, the world of music, and I like to think as Wes Montgomery as probably being the definition or the most influential jazz guitarist of all time. If you look at the scope of the guitarists across the history of this music, he's also, what we consider the father of smooth jazz. At the time that he received a record contract with A&M Records, Jerry Moss and Herb Albert owned the record label, and they were big in producing people like the Sister Sledge and Pointer Sisters and Captain and Tennille. But when they signed Wes, he recorded some songs that not only made the top jazz charts, it made the pop charts. Like he recorded Windy and tunes like California Dreamin' and some Beatles tunes that were just kind of made him a household name, and people actually learned about him, became actually a star out in Hollywood and in California. And I think Wes had a love affair with California because he had so much success when he went out there. I think there was a time when he was trying to relocate to California, but that didn't happen because the family didn't all want to go there. But that led the way for A&M to create artists like Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass, who came out with Rise, and Chuck Mangione with Feel So Good. All these instrumental pop songs that happened. Grover Washington Jr., Kenny G. It's just the list goes on of like how instrumental pop was influenced by him making that record and actually reaching the pop charts. So not only, do we see him as a great and influential jazz guitarist, we see him also as an innovator in kind of instrumental pop.
Okay, so one of his big hits was a cover of the Beatles' A Day in the Life. He even did Tequila. Now, before that, he was a straight ahead.
Yes, exactly.
Icon in a different world of music.
Right.
So he does these covers. Some strings are added. These are pop hits. Was that controversial at the time?
It was very, it was very controversial. Matter of fact, I had a couple conversations with some musicians around here, like great musicians, like, that said, I wasn't really with him, doing the pop thing. And there was a story, I did a record with Melvin Ryan, who was his organist, and he told me that he did this record that had all these pop hits, and they played the 5 spot in New York. And at the time, Coltrane was everything in New York, so everybody was just, every jazz musician was like, a disciple of Train. And so that music just resonated with musicians, particularly jazz musicians in New York. And I remember that Melvin said that we had to play that set list, The Day in the Life and California Dreamin' and Windy at the 5 spot. Wes wanted to premiere that because the label was like, hey, you're doing this thing, let's do it. And Melvin said he tried to take that music so far out and play like McCoy Tyner when they did it. It actually caused the rift between Melvin and Wes. But to say that it was controversial is that might actually even be an understatement in the world of jazz, because it kind of like Wes is somebody that was like this jazz icon, and then he went the pop route, and it's kind of broke some musicians' hearts.
But I think time has treated it okay.
Oh, time is the healer, and it actually history is looks on Wes very favorably, because he was able to exist in both arenas, and do it so well. So now jazz musicians are saying, not only was he this great iconic jazz, he was like a pop star. It's like, wow, you can have both worlds, So he's looked at very favorably in history as far as leading the charge on both those fronts.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 625 attorneys across 11 offices, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
Let's go back to Dave Lindquist's conversation with musician Rob Dixon and poet Lasana Kazimbe about jazz guitarist Wes Montgomery, who would have been 100 this year.
All right, I want to step back. You mentioned octaves. So, like a single line guitar soloist like B.B. King, that's a single line.
Right.
An octave is Wes would play a high A note and a low note simultaneously, and construct solos with that. So he would play the 2 notes simultaneously and do it would essentially sound like a chord solo, because the way of the movement, you have to, but it was octaves, and it just worked. It was something that was just very effective, and it was uniquely Wes Montgomery, and it was a signature sound for him that kind of that he used in the jazz arena as well as his instrumental pop. And his siblings played with him. Buddy Montgomery on piano and Monk Montgomery on bass guitar. Monk, people say, was like the first electric bass player.
One of them, to be known to really, dig into the electric bass, and they played together a lot. But from my story, just my conversations with people that played with Wes was just a dedicated person to rehearsing and working things out and getting things together. I mean, Wes just recorded with so many different people, not only his brothers, but also so many luminaries across the jazz spectrum. And one thing, if you ask any jazz musician about him, from Herbie Hancock to Jimmy Cobb, they would say that Wes was very meticulous in what he wanted, and he was very specific. So specific that I think that he kind of saw his career, he saw the vision, like where he wanted to go. There was a time when John Coltrane asked him to join the quartet before he hired McCoy Tyner, and Wes was like, no, because I have a vision for where my career is going to go in. So that is pretty bold, and you have to be your own person to turn down John Coltrane to work with an ensemble that created the history that group did.
Okay, but the Montgomery brothers, those are just 3 of dozens of world-class jazz musicians.
Correct.
In Indianapolis in the 1940s and 1950s. I would say people appreciate that legacy today more than they did maybe a few years ago, but it's still a hidden gem. Lasana, you grew up in Chicago, right?
I did, yes.
Did you grow up knowing as Indianapolis as the home for Wes Montgomery?
I did not.
Freddie Hubbard?
Nope.
J.J. Johnson?
Nope. None of that. Chicago has a distinction with our history, and you have this in Kansas City, you have it in Los Angeles, you have it in Detroit. These what are called Black Entertainment Boulevards, and they're essentially entertainment sectors that really were, responses that arose out of segregation. So Indianapolis, Indiana Avenue is that Black Entertainment Boulevard here. Chicago is State Street. So I knew State Street. And then coming up, I knew the history of music groups, jazz groups that came out of the 60s, really out of the Black Arts Movement. We have, Chicago has the distinction of having, I think more than any other city, during that Black Arts Movement era, 65 to 75, we had more ensembles of musical ensembles coming out of that era than any other city during the Black Arts Movement. So, and many of them are still around. And of course, we had these collectives like the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, AACM, which is still there. So that's the sort of thing that I grew up with, knowing that history because I was there. I was young and it was immediate. So that's my immediate context. So I came here in 2017, and of course, through college, I was a jazz head my whole life. I knew Wes Montgomery's music. I knew Freddie Hubbard's music, but when I started getting into college, and then I moved here in 2017, I started learning more about the biography of these folks, and then started learning about that Indiana Avenue history here. And, so it's just incredible. It's an amazing, rich corpus of creative expression.
And of course, it's easy to say, if someone visits Indiana Avenue today, there's very little evidence of that history. Rob, what should people know about that era and the music that was made then?
I said that Wes Montgomery was kind of what we say is the definition or the essence of what a jazz guitarist is, and so many people have been influenced. But you could say the same as of J.J. Johnson on trombone, from Indianapolis. He's kind of like the quintessential jazz trombonist. And if you look at Freddie...
Mount Rushmore, for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And then if you look at Freddie, he's somebody that kind of reinvented the trumpet. Like modern trumpet players, that's the person they look at. You had Dizzy Gillespie kind of like in that movement, and then Freddie Hubbard comes along and kind of redefines what the jazz trumpet is about, and from there you just have so many other great jazz musicians: Slide Hampton, James Spaulding, Melvin Ryan, Jimmy Coe, Bookie Johnson, just the list, Russell Webster, the list goes on. And one of the things that I admire about Wes Montgomery is that not only was he had just a strong vision for his career and so successful internationally, is that he was a big advocate for all the musicians in Indianapolis. And what he intended to do, his intention was to come back to Indianapolis and create a label and create a production company to highlight all these great musicians in Indianapolis. And that was a big plan, was create a label, create a production company, and then 6 months later he passed away, and at the age of 45. So it's something that wasn't realized about, he thought that there was not enough spotlight put on the great musicians in Indianapolis and Indiana Avenue, and that was one of his big goals in his life to do. And it's unfortunate because we have lost a part of this this history in terms of people knowing. There's very few people that know about the great legacy of Indiana Avenue, and so with programs like this, is we are pushing back and intend to change that. To let people know, hey, we're celebrating the life of a great musician that came from Indianapolis and the legacy of Indiana Avenue, and we're going to continue that legacy.
Just personally, I feel so fortunate that I had an afternoon where I sat down and talked with Pookie Johnson and his stories, and Mel Ryan, a wizard of the B3, right? And people should look up one of my favorite records, this bass player, Phil Ranelin,
yes,
made like these mind-expanding records in his career. So, it's one of those things where you start poking around. The Indianapolis jazz story is deep.
Yeah, it goes. It's it is very deep. There's many layers to the scene, to the tapestry of the Indianapolis jazz scene, and the reach of it, the reach of these musicians and their influence, not only for the maybe the songs that they've produced, but like what they've done on their instruments. And that's something that gets kind of lost too, that all these people were from Indiana Avenue. But that could be that there was a displacement of Indiana Avenue. Yeah. That was part of the problem of why this history hasn't been able to reach and people to know about it.
Well, one good thing is that it's not necessarily a past tense story. Could you tell us what you're doing with the from the 317 project?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So as I say before, one of the things that Wes wanted to do is shine a spotlight on the great musicians in Indianapolis, and I believe that if you fast forward in the 90s, I think that was, the intent of Babyface to come back and start a label, and I think L.A. Reid convinced them to move to Atlanta, and you had LaFace Records, and
the rest is history.
Yeah, the rest is history. They had so many great records, and what we intend to do with the From the 317 project is to record and feature a lot of the Indianapolis talent with national radio promotion and national publicity to just get the music out that is currently happening now, and just put a spotlight on the Indianapolis music scene, and that's from the 317, and then hopefully it will expand out and have other artists, have spotlights put on them from Indianapolis, and just to, really promote the music scene here.
Who are some collaborators you've been working with?
So we've worked with, Lasana is going to be one of our collaborators, but we've worked with Tad Robinson, great blues, Sarah Scarborough, great vocalist, Josh Kaufman, Bashir Assad, Maxie, Rusty Redenbacher is featured, as well as Charlie Ballantyne. You have Richard Sleepy Floyd, John Woods, Brandon Meeks, just a number of Ashley Baskins, Siren Simone. She's working with her, and it's going to be a to be continued kind of situation. So the first record that we put out is going to feature them, and then we're going to feature some bands on the next project, back to more individuals on the next one, and then more bands. So we have a lot of musicians in the queue to highlight.
Is there a release date for that record?
So we're looking at this first record. We're going to release in the end of the first quarter, so in March.
Excellent.
And then as I said before, it'll be a to be continued. So then you'll see another project that'll be released in like September, and then another one in January, and then another one, and we'll have a Spotify playlist as well as Apple playlist, and that'll be the really cool thing about this. So if you don't, the album or you get the CD, you can check out the two channels. We'll actually put up live concerts. We'll put up tracks that didn't make the record. We're trying to do a really big campaign about the city of Indianapolis and all the great musicians that exist in it.
Fantastic. Now, Lasana, if I could peek under the hood a little bit in your creative process, when you prepare a spoken word piece about a musician who played music that didn't have lyrics, what's the process?
Well, I'm an artist who really appreciates genealogy. And genealogy is a people's relationship to ideas that bind them together. So I'm very much immersed in learning about, reading about the lives and the trials and triumphs that individuals experienced in their life. And then I reflect and I think about the influence, in this case global, that individual continued to have. And what I'm describing is something that's not dead, but it's very much alive. And so what I try to do as an artist is to tap into that, and I try to feel and learn and this is going to sound really out there, but I try to listen to the colors that are in the music, and I try to listen to the tone and tempo. And then so when I'm writing, I'm thinking about feeling, I'm thinking about thought, I'm thinking about all of the sort of the blend of ingredients that go into giving birth to a creative piece. And I sit down and I begin to write. With this particular project, In Our Own Sweet Way, it's actually a riff on, I believe it's a Dave Brubeck song called In Your Sweet Way.
In Your Own Sweet Way.
In Your Own Sweet Way. So I thought it would be really cool to riff on that and do In Our Own Sweet Way. We're giving this tribute to Wes. So the piece that we're going to construct, it's going to be a little untraditional. It won't be Lasana's doing a piece, then Manan does her piece, then Bashiri does his piece. We're performing together.
Nice.
So we're actually writing right now and creating it, and we're going to integrate and synthesize our pieces. So what the end result will be, there will be this master piece that will be I think we're doing like a 50-minute set, but there will be multiple pieces that we all contribute, but it'll be so seamless that we'll sort of flow and blend into one another, like
Nice.
the bend in a river.
All right. So you mentioned the idea of a color in a piece of music, and I mean Wes's work, so warm, so smooth. I mean, this is a person who obviously was not fighting his instrument. I mean, his instrument was
Right.
it was coming right out of him through the notes.
Yeah, that's what you're describing is what I interpret as a balance of form and content, and that's that's essentially what I think great art, whether it's a painting, whether it's cuisine, whether it's a tapestry, whatever it is, you want to try to strike a balance between form and content. And one of the favorite pieces that I love listening to, the favorite album, is the album, I think it's called The Boss Guitar of Wes Montgomery.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, every cut, every track on that album, man, you just put it on repeat. And I love writing to it and listening to that, and it just draw a great deal of influence in that way.
And one thing too, if you've ever seen one of Lasana's productions, what is very attractive about his concepts is like he adds dimensions to the performance. So Fire Dance, for instance, we had the visual of the dance. We have the theater that Lasana presents with his poetry, and then you have the music. So, and it's all presented as one. unit, and I think it engages a lot of people. With this program with Wes Montgomery, I think it's going to add dimension to the music, with the theater and the poetry, and it tells a story in a way that people can really grab onto. I'm excited to see people and their response to this, because I know that it adds that dimension where it makes it accessible.
Yeah.
To a music that might not be as accessible to people initially.
Excellent. Definitely something to look forward to.
Yes.
Wes, of course, died too young at age 45 of a heart attack. His playing endures and continues to influence countless guitarists. I remember B.B. King, when he was in Indianapolis on stage, he would always mention, Wes is from your town. Lasana, just maybe the big picture question: why does Wes's work matter 100 years later?
I'm going to go back to highlighting and foregrounding the importance of genealogy. It is very important that we have a relationship with our history. It is very important that especially young people be introduced to the history so that they're not lost and they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think our history and our art, art reflects the social context. So it just in terms of, we can vary on this, but, I have major critiques of music and artistic production today. And I think what my critique comes from just observing how in a lot of circles, a lot of people doing music have really abandoned a lot of musical principles and things that have been worked out over the last century or so, and we get what we get.
Yep.
So it's very, very important to understand, to locate and apprehend, and then reinscribe those traditions through the genealogy. And one of the most immediately accessible and exciting mediums to do that is through the lens of art.
For ticket information for In Our Own Sweet Way, visit thecabaret.org. In other Centennial news, Westbound, a film documentary based on Wes Montgomery's life, will premiere February 26th on Bloomington Public Television station WTIU, and the annual Art and Soul Black History Month celebration includes a February 25th tribute to Wes Montgomery at the Arts Garden. I believe we will see you on stage that day.
Yes, and you'll see me on stage, and I believe Lasana will be on stage as well. I feel strongly about and just really good about these programs, because not only are they of high artistic merit, there's something that we're collaborating with the Wes Montgomery family, with the Wes Montgomery estate, and we have their blessing, and they're going to be a part of it. You'll see Robert Montgomery making maybe a couple of announcements before the program on May 13th, as well as in February. So it feels good to be a part of his family and make this something that celebrates them as well.
Thank you, Rob and Lasana, for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to Dave, Rob, and Lasana. Again, the event on May 13th is called In Our Own Sweet Way, honoring the artistic legacy of Wes Montgomery. Go to thecabaret.org for more information and to buy tickets. To read more from Dave Lindquist, check out this week's issue of IBJ. He writes about the Vault Indy, a speakeasy in the Bates Hendricks neighborhood that requires a code for entry. And bonus, the story includes a map of other speakeasies in the city. Also in this week's IBJ, reporter John Russell explores why increasing numbers of big university and not-for-profit donors are requesting anonymity, and why that might not be a good thing. Plus, Peter Blanchard looks at proposed legislation that would increase the speed limit for trucks on rural highways, and he explains why the bill is probably not going to become law, at least not this year. Thanks for listening to the IBJ podcast. Mason King will be back next week.